I've seen so many people chase a cheap sub that sounds great on paper, only to end up with a box that rattles, stalls, or just never hits that visceral thump they imagined. The regret comes from underestimating how much the enclosure, power source, and room size matter before the first bass note drops. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. In this video I'm going to walk through why the 18-sound 21NTLW5000.8 might actually be a smarter buy than the bargain options you see on auction sites, and where it can still leave you wishing you'd read the fine print first. Let's start with the most common hesitation. Do I really need a 21-inch sub for my home theater? A 21-inch driver is not a novelty, it's a size you usually see in professional cinema or high-end car audio rigs. That means the cone can push a lot of air, producing low frequencies well below the 40 Hz mark that smaller subs start to struggle with. If you have a medium to large listening room, a dedicated home theater seating area, or you like to feel the bass as much as you hear it, the sheer displacement of a 21-inch diaphragm can make the difference between a nice soundtrack and a room-shaking experience. On the other hand, if you're sitting on a 10-foot couch in a studio-size apartment, that same driver will probably dominate the space, masking dialogue and making the bass feel boomy rather than tight. The first practical strength of the 21NTLW5000.8 is its dual Tetracoil aluminum voice coil design. In plain English, that gives you 4 separate coil terminals instead of the usual 2. The real-world benefit is flexibility when matching the sub to an amplifier. You can wire the coils in series for a higher impedance if your amp prefers 16 ohms, or parallel for a lower impedance to pull more current from a robust, low-impedance amp. That means you don't have to buy a dedicated sub-amp that only supports 8 ohms. You can adapt the sub to what you already own, provided the amp can handle the power. This is a big win for DIYers who like to fine-tune their system, but it also adds a layer of complexity for someone who just wants to plug it in and go. If you're not comfortable reading a wiring diagram, you might end up with a mismatched load that either limits the output or risks overheating the coil. Power handling is another headline point: 1-800 Watts RMS and 4000 watts peak. Those numbers sound massive, and they are, but they also tell you that the sub expects a serious amount of headroom from its amp. In everyday use, you'll rarely be feeding it the full 4000 watts. You'll probably sit in the 500 to 1000 watt RMS range for most movie or music listening. The upside is that the sub will stay cool and controlled even during those explosive action scenes where the soundtrack hits a low-frequency wallop. The downside is that you'll need an amplifier that can deliver at least 8000 watts RMS into the impedance you choose, and that usually means a multi-channel or dedicated sub-amp that costs as much as the sub itself. Pairing a weak or underpowered amp leads to distortion, and that's the exact scenario people regret after buying a cheap sub that can't keep up. Now, let's talk about the enclosure. A 21-inch driver is heavy. We're looking at well over 40 pounds just for the driver alone, and it needs a sturdy box to keep the vibrations from leaking into the room as rattling. Most reviewers who have tried a sub of this size recommend a sealed enclosure of at least 4 cubic feet for tight, controlled bass, or a ported box of 68 cubic feet if you want that deep, booming rumble. Building or buying the right enclosure is not optional. A poorly sized box will either make the sub sound flappy and underpowered, or cause it to overexcite the driver and potentially damage it. This is a hidden trade-off that many first-time buyers overlook. The sub is only as good as the box it lives in, and that box is an extra cost and a DIY project in itself. Installation logistics are another real-world factor. The driver's diameter means you need a fairly large cutout in your cabinet or wall, and the mounting hardware is robust but not plug-and-play. You'll need to drill a 21-inch hole, seal it properly, and secure the driver with screws that can handle the torque. If you're putting it into a car trunk, you'll have to consider the vehicle's power supply. The sub will draw a lot of current, so a high-output alternator or a dedicated battery is advisable. In a home setting, you'll be running heavy-gauge speaker wire, often 1012 AWG, too.